Good afternoon. I'll give everybody a sound check. Make sure we're ready to go. Everybody's good? I'm Will Johnson. I'm the police chief for the city of Arlington. I want to provide an update to previous information that I have shared concerning the officer-involved shooting that occurred in the early morning hours of August 7th. From the onset of this investigation, we have pledged to work in an expeditiously quick manner in an effort to provide the needed information to answer the questions concerning this shooting and to work in an open and transparent manner to ensure the investigative process is procedurally fair for all individuals involved. For those listening to this press conference who may not know our department, this pledge is not just given in this case only, it is part of our core values. We believe and practice procedural justice and understand the values of community policing. We also understand our oath of public service and are committed to allowing the facts of the case determine the outcome. During my last press conference, I expressed the nature of the confrontation between Mr. Taylor and officers inside the building, as well as the behavior and decisions made by all persons present during this encounter were of critical importance to understand this event. A team of investigators has been working continuously in an effort to gain this knowledge. To be clear, the investigation is still ongoing and many investigative tasks remain unmet. However, investigators have received officer statements concerning the details of this encounter. I'm prepared to share generalized facts from these statements, but before I do, it is important to understand the decision-making process officers are required to perform prior to the use of deadly force. The authority to use deadly force, the authority to use force, including deadly force, for Texas peace officers is established by the Texas Penal Code and the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. The use of deadly force must only be used in the protection of a life of another or to protect the life of a police officer. The United States Supreme Court case Graham v. Connor provides legal expectations officers must consider when making the decision to use deadly force. Even with this guidance, the use of deadly force is one of the most scrutinized and legally debated aspects of law. There are an endless number of factors that can contribute to the decision-making process to use deadly force, but some of the most obvious and available factors include the nature of offense, aggression demonstrated by the suspect, presence of a weapon, the size of the suspect, the size of an officer, lighting conditions, and possible community harm created if the suspect is not immediately taken into custody. In layman's terms, Graham v. Connor takes all of these factors into consideration and provides the following legal expectation that force be applied in a manner consistent with what an objectively reasonable officer would do in a similar set of circumstances. This standard is applied to the facts and circumstances experienced by the officer at the time the force was used, not through the privileged perspective and understanding of a post-event environment. This is done with the Supreme Court's full understanding that police officers face extraordinarily difficult experiences in the field. Officers are tasked with making split-second decisions that have long-lasting consequences. In short, the oversimplification of the facts is ill-advised and often causes significant community harm. In an officer-involved shooting investigation, criminal investigators evaluate all relevant facts and evidence through this legal framework to determine whether an officer's actions were authorized under the law. Administrative investigators, commonly referred to as internal affairs, thoroughly review all available facts and evidence to determine if an officer's conduct and decisions are consistent with departmental expectations, policies, and training. When the criminal and administrative investigations are considered together, there are three possible outcomes any investigation concerning an officer-involved shooting. Those outcomes are: the officer's actions were legally justified, and their actions were also consistent with departmental expectations, policy, and training. A second outcome could be officers' actions were legally justified, and their actions were inconsistent with departmental policies, training, and expectation. The final possible outcome is the officer's actions are neither legally justified nor were they consistent with the department's expectations, policy, and training. The reason there are three different possible outcomes is because there is a different burden of proof for criminal investigations than an administrative investigation. A criminal investigation requires probable cause for arrest and proof beyond a reasonable doubt for a conviction. Administrative investigations require a preponderance of evidence. This also answers the question as to why cases such as this oftentimes require a significant amount of time to investigate. These are the basic questions the investigative process seeks to answer when conducting an officer-involved shooting investigation, and the different legal thresholds that must be met in the decision-making process. With this understanding in mind, I will now present the known facts concerning the August 7th shooting. The details of this shooting were provided by police officers who were either involved or witnessed the shooting and electronic police records. No video evidence of the shooting is available to our knowledge. At approximately 1:06 a.m., officers were dispatched to a business located at 4720 South Collins Street. At approximately 1:10 a.m., two officers arrived and quickly determined that the location was an auto body shop and not the dealership described in the 911 call. At approximately 1:12 a.m., the correct offense location was updated to 1400 East I-20. The initial response included 6 officers who arrived in 5 marked patrol units. Officer Miller and his field training officer, Corporal Dale Wiggins, arrived in the same patrol unit. At approximately 1:13 a.m., officers were advised that Mr. Taylor had crashed through the gate of the dealership. At approximately 1:15 a.m., one officer found the gate at the north end of the property slightly open and the lock on the ground. At approximately 1:17 a.m., the other 5 officers arrived at various points around the east of the main showroom building. Multiple responding officers spotted Mr. Taylor in the building from their respective vantage points. The officer that found the gate open approached the showroom building from the north. Mr. Taylor and the officer met, separated by a locked glass door. The officer spotted a bulge in Mr. Taylor's short pockets. Mr. Taylor held up a set of car keys and told the officer that he was going to steal a car. The officer instructed him to get on the ground. Mr. Taylor said no and attempted to open the locked door that separated he from the officer. At approximately 1:18 a.m., officers determined someone needed to establish a perimeter on the west side of the building. Officer Miller and Corporal Wiggins moved along the north portion of the building to take this position. At this point, they passed where the officer who was previously talking to Mr. Taylor stood. Corporal Wiggins momentarily stopped with this officer who was verbally engaged with Mr. Taylor through the glass door, while Officer Miller continued westward. Officer Miller found where Mr. Taylor had crashed his vehicle through the glass door. Officer Miller entered the location alone through the broken glass door. Officer Miller first saw Mr. Taylor at the front of the business and began to give commands. Mr. Taylor ran away from Officer Miller, toward the southwest portion of the building to a locked door. At this location, Mr. Taylor began lunging his body into the glass door multiple times in an effort to break the glass. One officer on the exterior of the building saw this and reported that the glass wall was visibly shaken from the force of impact. Officer Miller followed Mr. Taylor into the southeast portion of the building and gave him instructions to get on the ground. Mr. Taylor turns towards Officer Miller and begins to rapidly approach the officer while cursing. Corporal Wiggins entered the building at this time while Officer Miller addressed Mr. Taylor in the rear of the building. Officer Miller retreated while giving commands to Mr. Taylor. When Corporal Wiggins saw Officer Miller was standing in a stationary position, and Mr. Taylor was actively advancing towards Officer Miller. Corporal Wiggins positioned himself near Officer Miller, saw Mr. Taylor quickly approaching Officer Miller, assessed the threat, and removed his taser from his holster. At that point, Corporal Wiggins heard a pop and told investigators he believed Officer Miller had fired his taser. The pop heard by Corporal Wiggins was Officer Miller discharging his duty weapon the first time. Corporal Wiggins then discharged his taser because Mr. Taylor continued to advance towards Officer Miller. Officer Miller subsequently fired 3 additional times. At approximately 1:19 a.m., officers report on the radio that shots were fired. An additional fact that is important to know, there was no physical contact between Mr. Taylor and officers. Based on these facts, we will be proceeding with the following course of action. Criminal investigators will proceed working through the unmet investigative tasks. Those tasks include additional evidentiary reports such as the autopsy report, ballistic and toxicology reports, which are all necessary and should be considered in the criminal case. Once this investigative work is complete, all necessary evidentiary reports will be submitted to the Tarrant County District Attorney for consideration and for submission to the grand jury. The grand jury will decide if the use of force in this incident rises to the level of criminal prosecution. Additionally, I need to clarify the FBI involvement in this case. It has been reported that the FBI has taken over this investigation. It has also been reported that the FBI is not involved in this case at all. Neither of these statements are accurate. We are in dialogue with the FBI, and we are sharing information concerning the facts of this case as they become available through the investigative process. If the FBI determines the facts of this case suggest a civil rights violation has occurred, the FBI is prepared to act accordingly. Now for the administrative investigation update. As I stated earlier, the administrative investigation reviews the facts from a different perspective than the criminal investigation. Were the actions taken by the officer consistent with departmental policies, training, and expectations? This is the focus of the administrative investigation. As the police chief, I am charged with the responsibility of reviewing these facts as they are available in the administrative process. Decisions that I make, however, are not made in isolation. I have sought the wise counsel of a team of highly experienced criminal and administrative investigators. I have given them specific guidance from the onset of this investigation that we would follow the facts and that the facts alone would determine the outcome of our actions. Recommendations that I have received are based solely on the facts as we know them today. Although I have received a unified recommendation from the entire investigative team, I alone as chief bear responsibility for any decision made. From an administrative perspective, I have found several decisions made on scene to be troubling. Officers had reason to believe at the time of the offense that Mr. Taylor was committing a felony burglary in progress. Additionally, officers could not have known at the time of contact with Mr. Taylor if he was in fact the only person in the building considered to be a suspect. The standard response in this situation would be to secure the perimeter of the building prior to developing a plan to make entry. Ideally, an entry team would discuss their objective, their roles and responsibilities for each team member prior to making entry. Absent exigent circumstances, to protect the life of another, it is standard practice for the primary officer or a supervisor to formulate a coordinated response. Absent exigent circumstances, an officer would not enter a building alone without communicating their intent with other officers. Officer Miller and Corporal Wiggins were originally tasked with securing the west perimeter. As Officer Miller moved along the exterior of the building to the western perimeter, he discovered the broken glass doors. Officer Miller entered the building without communicating his intent to Corporal Wiggins. This placed Officer Miller and the other officers on scene in a position of undue risk. Corporal Wiggins was unaware of Officer Miller's intention to enter the building alone and expressed a sense of urgency in his statement to investigators to rejoin Officer Miller in the building. Recognizing Officer Miller's tactical error, Corporal Wiggins moved quickly to rejoin his recruit inside the building. There was no articulation of exigent circumstances to warrant an uncoordinated entry into the location by Officer Miller. Additionally, multiple officers did report that Mr. Taylor did have a bulge in his pocket when they first saw him. The nature of the bulge was unknown to officers at that time. After the shooting, the bulge was determined to be a wallet and a cell phone. It is reasonable that officers were concerned that a weapon may be present. Officer Miller had this information prior to entering the building, yet he still entered the building alone. This further underscores the questionable nature of Officer Miller's decision to enter the building alone and without an arrest plan. Upon entering the building, Officer Miller confronted Mr. Taylor near the front of the business. Mr. Taylor retreated to the rear of the building, and Officer Miller pursued Mr. Taylor deeper into the business. Again, this demonstrated questionable decision-making on the part of Officer Miller that contributed to the outcome of this event. It is clear from the facts obtained that Mr. Taylor was non-compliant with police commands. The video evidence available suggests Mr. Taylor exhibited abnormal behavior during this encounter. Officers reported that upon making contact with Mr. Taylor, he screamed vulgarities at them and walked aggressively towards Officer Miller while disobeying his commands to stop. Among other statements, Officer Miller reported that he was in fear and that he believed that he was alone inside the building and that he would be overpowered by Mr. Taylor. Although Corporal Wiggins had joined Officer Miller in the building and was approximately 4 feet away, Officer Miller reported that he believed that he was alone. This fear and feeling of isolation was the result of his poor decision to enter the building without assistance and without an arrest plan. As I stated earlier, this investigation is not complete. I am only reporting the facts as I know them today. The facts available demonstrate that Officer Miller exercised inappropriate judgment by entering the building alone. This unilateral decision to enter the building and to continue the pursuit deeper into the building upon making contact with Mr. Taylor, along with failing to communicate with fellow officers or develop an arrest plan, created an environment of cascading consequences that produced an unrecoverable outcome. As it relates to the decision to use deadly force, I have serious concerns as to the rationale articulated for the use of deadly force in this incident. These concerns, however, are best addressed through the criminal investigation process. However, based on a preponderance of evidence available to me and the facts revealed by the investigative team, I have decided to terminate Officer Miller's employment with the Arlington Police Department for exercising poor judgment. We will continue to review the actions and the tactics of all personnel for compliance with departmental policy. While today marks the end of Officer Miller's employment, the criminal investigation runs through the grand jury and will take weeks to perfect. The actions I've taken today, I do so with humility. This is an extremely difficult and tragic case. Our community is hurting. Our family is hurting. Our department is certainly hurting. And quite frankly, our nation is hurting. I want to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the Taylor family, to our community, and to the men and women of the Arlington Police Department for allowing us the time needed to get to this point of the investigation. This has been an extremely difficult experience for many people. Although the investigation is not over, my hope is that the information shared today can assist in the healing process. Some communities in our nation have been torn apart by similar challenges. Arlington has always been a community that comes together during difficult times. As a community, we are far from perfect. We must continue to invest in the opportunities of all people and be inclusive. There will be many emotional expressions voiced and media commentary following this press conference. My hope is that it is done with a degree of understanding and respect for all parties involved. That concludes my formal remarks, and I'm prepared to answer your questions at this time.
Chief, you said that they heard the first shot, or the corporal heard the first shot. Can you kind of explain where the other shots came into play, and at what point did they happen?
Also, was he shot? Did that first shot hit him?
The sequence of events is that one shot from a pistol took place, a taser was deployed, multiple shots, 3 other shots were fired after the taser was deployed. Officers reported that after the first shot was fired, Mr. Taylor was still advancing towards Officer Miller when the taser was deployed at that point in time.
Do we know if that first shot hit the suspect?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Chief, you may mention it, about how far away from, as best you can tell, were Mr. Taylor and your 2 officers when the use of force was taken?
The geospatial aspects of the crime scene have still yet to be determined, but my most informed answer at this point in time is 7 to 10 feet.
Could I just ask you to walk us through once again between the time Officer Miller starts chasing him to the back of the dealership? Could you take us from there to the finish of the shots and the taser?
Officer Miller and Mr. Taylor were at the rear of the building. Corporal Wiggins was making entry at that point in time. Officer Miller was retreating as Mr. Taylor was advancing. By the time that Corporal Wiggins regained sight of Officer Miller was in a stationary position. Corporal Wiggins did observe Mr. Taylor continue to advance.
At what point did you realize that termination was the only option in this case?
Upon receiving the briefing from my homicide investigators this morning.
What was your recommendation from the team that you assembled to help you with this decision?
To be clear, their recommendation is just based on the facts of the criminal case. They provided me the information. The employment decision is mine and mine alone. Yes, sir.
How long after he drew the weapon did he fire at the
Officer Miller entered into the building with his weapon drawn, which is standard protocol for a burglary in progress call.
Did Corporal Wiggins ever question what Officer Miller was doing, or how quickly did the shot, taser, and the subsequent 3 shots, did Corporal Wiggins ever have a chance to try to communicate, hey, what are you doing?
Corporal Wiggins was attempting to catch up with Officer Miller after Officer Miller entered the building alone. There was no conversation between the two as they were dealing with the advancing threat of Mr. Taylor.
Do you think the administrative outcome of this would have been different 2 years ago?
No, sir, I do not.
Did Officer Miller explain why he continued to shoot after Corporal Wiggins had used the taser?
I think it's really important for everybody to understand that the time it takes me to verbalize what happened is exceedingly slower than the actual reality of what was experienced. We're talking about seconds.
You mentioned that you didn't have a proper arrest plan. Talk about protocol when you have a situation like this. Is there a moment where officers gather and come up with some sort of tactical plan that didn't happen here?
Every situation is different depending on whether or not there is a risk of loss of life or whether or not a suspect is contained inside a building where no one else may be present. Certainly, in this situation, it would have been prudent for officers to be able to secure the perimeter around the building, establish a plan, and determine the best course of action to try to arrest Mr. Taylor successfully.
Does the corporal face any sort of punishment for allowing his trainee officer to be separated from him?
Absolutely not. Corporal.
Why did he allow him to go in there by himself?
Well, I think it's very important for everybody to understand that employees, police officers in field training, they are required and they are trained at that point in time to be able to function. They have the skills, the decision-making process, the authority to function. Their field training officer does give them guidance. In this instance, the corporal momentarily stopped to speak with another officer when Mr. Miller continued to advance into the building without his corporal's knowledge.
Chief, can you say, perhaps you said this in the time I didn't quite catch it, from the moment that Officer Miller entered to the time the first shot was fired, what kind of time frame are we looking at?
I believe it was approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes, 10 seconds.
Based on what you know now, was this shooting legally justified?
I don't have the answer to that. Part of my response was to properly explain the legal framework by which the court decides the objectively reasonable standard. I can't apply that at this time with what I know, but we are committed to providing a full criminal case for the Tarrant County District Attorney to be able to present to the grand jury, and the citizens of Tarrant County will decide whether or not it was legal.
Can you tell us what you told the Taylor family? Did you apologize?
I certainly expressed remorse that their son had been killed.
Chief, have
Just
you
a couple more
spoken-
questions, people. Just a
Have
couple
you
more
spoken personally, face-to-face, with your officer who's now been terminated? And so, I realize that's a private meeting, but could you address to some degree what that was like?
Difficult.
Chief,
This is an extraordinarily difficult case. Decisions were made that have catastrophic outcomes.
Chief, has
Yes,
the
sir.
department been in contact at all with the Department of Justice?
Well, the FBI is part of the Department of Justice, so yes.
So what's the next step here? We're going forward. You mentioned talking about bringing this criminal case to a grand jury, possibly to the DA's office. Just talk to us about what the immediate next steps are going to be in this.
Well, to be clear, it's not possible. We will be advancing a criminal case. We will present it to the district attorney's office, and I have been in conversation with the district attorney. It will be presented to a grand jury.
Has the officer been charged?
No, ma'am. We will be presenting a case to the district attorney. They will be referring it to the grand jury, but we have to do the investigative tasks that are outstanding right now, and we have to receive investigative reports that are still outstanding. Thank you so much for your attention today.